My final question to kind of wrap this all up is, considering the challenges and inequities that are currently present, a health pandemic, a racial pandemic, protests about racial injustice, in our economic insecurity. Do you think individually, are we in a moment where, culture institutions and art museums that will say are historic in nature or that are getting, that are going to start, should they be rethinking their mission and why they exist and what they're and who they're for and why?
I think absolutely. I guess I can go, even though I think yes. And I think that I wanted to talk about this before, and I'm glad we got back to this point because I was thinking about this. I don't know if anyone read, Kimberly Drew just wrote an article in Vanity Fair, and it's about like what is the role of museums or like museums in 2020, or what should museums look like. And I think one person, I think like the last paragraph, I can't remember the name, but they mentioned like they believe in a future where museums are obsolete or not needed. And I thought that was such a radical way of thinking, because I haven't even thought of that as like a framework, because I think that I was just like not thinking that far. And I think that it brings up a great point, because I think that if institutions start thinking about, and this is because I'm like really into language as a poet, I think the language is important to talk about here. Is like, what were museums created to do, right? What were museums created to do? It was a way to, I guess, I think that sometimes they're a way to, I guess, um, exemplify what has happened in history, but also we see museums, as Lamarchi brought up before, is like as a way to talk about what is beauty and how do we see beauty, and talking about those different interactions. And I think that if the museums were first created, like if we look back about, I think that this would be an individual assessment, is if the museum was created to keep some people out and keep a certain status quo of ideas of what is fine art, what is good, what is like worth saving, in this way that people don't have access with, we have to imagine a world where that is not possible, because it's only going to revert the same hierarchies that we're seeing actualized in our society, right? And I think that the way they're thinking is like there's a different there's a different sphere or space that we have seen and that we have actualized and interacted with, that is not a museum, that also like that also values and deeply invests in art. And I think that we can see those, like I think about the Harlem, the Studio Museum in Harlem, how like that museum in Harlem has been a site of like deeply investing in Black art, right? And I think that its intentionality from the beginning was very clear. But when we look at a museum like, I guess, the Guggenheim, like even I, as a person who used to be a student in New York City, I went to NYU, and we couldn't get access to the Guggenheim because they wouldn't let us in for free. It was the only museum in the city that I think that we can access for free. And I think about what are those institutions are still standing for and how they are not changing with the times. And I think that I believe that in order to get to any type of like change or I guess like new vision, I think that one, museums have to start doing a deep, I guess, analysis of like what their stance are, what are they doing, and if they are not investing in the community, then I don't think they are going to be, as Lamerty said, be relevant in the future. They're not going to be relevant. People are going to stop investing in them and going to invest in other spaces that that do that work. And I also think that what you'll also see is I think that a new space that we didn't even know was possible, where art can exist in the same sphere, but also do the things that we wanted to do. We all, like, I think that most of us, well, I can't really speak for everyone, but I feel like for myself, I go to museums so I can be able to have not only a look at what I'm seeing around me in a different light, but I'm also interested in how different people are seeing their own environments through their own eyes. And I feel like we all go to art to just I think stories are really the heart of it, right? Whatever the story is or whatever the conversation is, we're drawn to it. And I think that museums, as they currently are sites of stolen history, are sites of gaps in archives, are sites of uplifting some and keeping some out. And I think that currently they don't really serve their communities as much as they can be. And I think that there's going to be a whole new landscape in the future that actually does the work that we wanted to do. So I'm not sure if I'm like landing on the thing where like museums will be obsolete, but I do think that like, I think of some tangible things I think about is like giving those artifacts back to First Nations people and the countries that where those artifacts were stolen on. I don't think that art can be, I think that to say that it's going to be useful for me to see is not, I think that is an individual mindset. And if I'm only coming here to like take a part of it by like looking and not thinking about the context of how it was stolen or taken or the context of how it arrived here, I think that that is the individualism that will give us further down the road of like where we see these travesties happen, and then people don't like 30, 50 years from now don't have access to even their own history.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you.
Part
Yeah,
of,
go ahead.
yeah, part of me really wants to tell museums, hey man, you need to be changing your mission. You guys need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how you guys are still living in this world. But then another part of me just doesn't want them to win, because this isn't new. People have been saying this forever. For as long as all of us have been artists, we have been in spaces saying, this doesn't feel right. You need to change this. You need to move this. You need to do this. And now, again, when it's based solely on your survival, because everyone is acknowledging that the world is changing, and having a museum full of white artists and white people and white history with this new world, people are scared. And they're like, this isn't, how do we still move and shake in this new world? And now everybody wants to kind of custom tailor their programming to the audience that they need to come to their space to survive. And for me, I'm like, I'm sorry, you need to be passed over. If you didn't think that racial equality, if you didn't think that having Black artists and Black programming in your space was important for the past 50, 100, 200 years, I don't want you to think it's important now that grants are attached. So, I mean, I think if it's truly authentic to them, and there are people in these organizations who have been shunned when they brought this up, if they really want to, if the leadership wants to listen to them now and give them the space, then I think great if it's already in your space. But what I've been feeling and seeing is a lot of these organizations are running out and grabbing as many Black people as they can to kind of rework their system. And it's like, nah, I feel you've kind of already set your table.
I agree with you, Tori and Golden, in everything that you said. And I just want to say that I love all of you and what this conversation is generating and the genius of bringing this conversation forward. Thank you, Kat, for that. But in thinking about a movie I had seen called The Time Machine, there was a moment in that movie when the person who had created the time machine goes to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And there's a hologram that is a Black man who was a leading docent. And when he returned again to this space of the Met, this hologram had been broken and discarded into the basement. And it was acting in a jerky fashion to tell the story. And what it reminded me of is that how important, as Golden has said, language is, and how up to date we need to be with respect to what language means, what is the meaning that people are putting into the words that are being said about a situation and its description, its power to deliver. And what was interesting about that hologram, it had no more power to deliver in its jerky actions. And if we can see into a future of what museums need to constantly review, if anything, is the mission if they are going to survive. So I loved the question, but however, I'm not seeing museums in the space of not creating spaces where people have to continuously code switch to be in that space, to react in that space, to be okay in that space, to look at the incident of the children going into the MFA from the Davis Academy and them being watched, how uncomfortable that must be. How uncomfortable it is to have to change your vocabulary when you go into a space like that, to not be ridiculed. So until the missions evolve in those places that encompass the language and the reflection of communication of everyone, it's a done deal. Demise is happening, and we see it right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, I agree. Chanel, final thought?
Oh,
No
wow, pressure cooker. After all that great stuff that just got spewed out, man. Yeah, I think I'm struggling because part of me wants to be hopeful and optimistic and like museums can be these wonderful places. Whoa. And at the same time, history has shown us that words can be manipulated, you know? So while it's nice to think that changing the language of a mission will also magically bibbity boppity boop and make the organization better, that's not realistic. Like, again, for me, I'm less about the words and more about the action. Quite frankly, the beginning to the change is people gotta go. Lots of white people and lots of positions of power need to be given a great package to eject themselves, or they need to be fired. And their spaces need to be filled with people of color. That's the hard truth. That's the hard truth. No one wants to acknowledge that as a practical solution. For damn sure, nobody's doing it. That's what it would take, because ultimately institutions are made up of people, and people are carrying different intersections of their identities and experiences. And what we've seen and what we continue to see is that our institutions in particular are heralded by typically white people of privilege. And that, again, like that individual framework that you're carrying with you into your work environment seeps into the things that you're managing, the way you interact with people, the way that you design and plan. Like you can't separate the individual from the collective impact of the institution. So it really requires white people giving up their power and either gracefully leaving or being fired, and having those positions filled with people of color who are not only thinking about the language that they can put out front, but also the internal actions that they're doing to spark the change in mentality and work culture that then seeps into the work that they want to do with external partners.